For some number of years, experience beginning look like this, and then after some time, the same enthusiasm and newness and freshness, and something happens that doesn't stay where you thought it was going to stay and keep going. So they were asking. Okay. We as a couple are looking at how we're doing. It's good to take a look at how you're doing, and by what standards should we, or by what method should we use to evaluate our standing in absorption in Krishna consciousness. This is their language, so just use their language. And I thought to take a look at some measures or some methods, starting with Rupa Goswami. So those of you that are experienced, you'll appreciate hearing from our acharyas. Those of you that are a little newer, you'll get some acquaintance with some of our acharyas. We'll start with Rupa Goswami. And of course, the primary next in line after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was Rupa Goswami to explain Lord Chaitanya's teachings, specifically the teachings of bhakti, specifically the teachings of bhakti rasa. And his main work, most celebrated work, is Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And those of you that have been around for some time, you know that the primary verse upon which the whole of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu rests is a definition of bhakti. And the definition of bhakti, anyavilashita shunyam, jnana karma dhyanabratam, anukoyena krishna shivanam bhakti uttama. So this is pursuing the topic, how to evaluate your standing in Krishna consciousness. The highest bhakti is defined as continuous service or emotions directed towards Krishna, his expansion forms or others related to him, with underlined, a pleasing attitude toward Krishna. We're going to see another image that's saying the same thing, only it's depicting it in a different way visually. That's the highest bhakti, should be devoid of desires for other than the desire to please the Lord, and unobstructed by impersonal gyan, materialistic rituals of karma, or other unfavorable acts. So that's the second half is the negative, and the first half is the positive. Or the second half is exclusive, and the first half is inclusive. So how you can evaluate here's our topic: evaluating when standing and absorption in. So, standing and absorption in Krishna consciousness. This is Rupa Goswami's definition. How much on the positive side is the object, Krishna, the object of devotion, Krishna, being rendered with a pleasing attitude towards Krishna. For example, some time ago, visiting a home, one devotee was, it wasn't in a public gathering, it was just a little private discussion, saying, I'm concerned that my deity worship has become a little mechanical, and I still do in a punctual and proper way, but I find it has become a little mechanical. And, so many circles of this and make the offerings, and it's become mechanical, and that concerns me. Which is a red flag about evaluating our standing and absorption in Krishna consciousness. Because the essence of bhakti is underlined, a pleasing attitude towards Krishna. So then there's another, on the negative side, devoid of desires other than the desire to please Krishna, and unobstructed by impersonal jnana, the materialistic rituals of karma, or other unfavorable acts. So I'm going to speak a little very differently, actually, to this group because of how mature you are in your bhakti. Most of you, with a few exceptions. Someone was sharing, I really like the way that they were sharing, their reading has moved to a position where they're not just trying to learn something new, even learn something more about Krishna, but what the attitude with which they're involving themselves in their reading is how this is going to draw me closer to Krishna. It's like they're reading from their heart. They're trying to receive and reaching out to Krishna from the heart, not just gathering information. I say gathering information because that's largely what the education system is that we're introduced to. In our modern education system, it's the information. I mean, it's not just IT jobs, but it's just the way people are trained in other fields. There's exceptions, but that's largely information. And then you can say back the information, you get good grades, you get a good position in your career, and you keep going, you get rewarded for being good information processors. And perhaps to some degree, that's our approach, maybe someone's approach to Krishna Bhakti. In terms of learning about Krishna, I find I do that to some degree after all these years of Bhakti. And then I'm learning, it's not just beginning to learn, but learning to moderate and to try to understand the purpose behind what the curiosity. It's good to have curiosity. It's good to want to know. And in our devotional texts, we have so much more refined understanding of God than simply, He's Almighty. I'll just give one example that I've of late been pursuing. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur very, very, very clearly writes, how old was Krishna when he left Mathura and left Vrindavan and went to Mathura? It was 11 years, 7 months, 10 years, 7 months, And Rupa Goswami confirms the same. Rupa Goswami said, in fact, Vishwanath, which day of the lunar calendar, it was a Trayodasi day that he left at certain, the moon passing through a certain nakshatra. And then it became the Chaturdasi day when he killed Kamsa. And then how long was it before he received his Upanayana in Gargamuni? It was before he was 11. So the information part is interesting. But if it stays on the information platform, I'm just trying to connect with how you evaluate your absorption in and your standing in Krishna consciousness. It's nice to learn about Krishna, but if it stays on the information platform, it's not fulfilling. It's fantastic, but it's still not fulfilling. So after some days, he received his Upanayana. Ugrasena became the king. His mother and father arranged for his Upanayana. And at around 11, he spent 2 months at Sandipani Muni's school and came back. And it was from the time he entered Mathura to the time he sent Uddhava, it was around 3 months. And so Uddhava went for some time. Then how long did he remain in Mathura? I started to become curious about it. I found 3 references without saying that Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur said that they haven't been able to find the pramana. But we know that Jarasandha attacked Mathura 17 times. So how long did it take to mass? The first time was 13 Akshahini divisions. And by the time the 18th time came around, it was 23 Akshahini divisions. So where did he get all those soldiers and how long did it take for that to happen? So Vishwanath, it's just curious, but what scripture tells you about the activities of the personality of God, how long he stays in places. Anyways, references say that he remained in Mathura until he was 24 years and some months. So that means from 11 till 24, 13 years, 11 attacks, working on attack number 18. Jarasandha was really good at gathering armies, if that's the duration of time. Because then the further explanation is, after Jarasandha came the 18th time, they jumped off the mountain. The commentary says Krishna arranged for celestial chariots to descend that whisked him and Balaram away instantly to Dwarka, no one could see. So they're in Dwarka. And shortly after, married Rukmini. So he remained in Dwarka, according to these persons that I'm asking them, where's the pramana? But he was in Dwarka for 96 years and 8 months. So we subtract 125 years, 126 years, you get how long he was in Mathura, because he was in Vrindavan for 10 years, 7 months. Now, I've discussed this topic with many of our learned devotees. Shivaram Maharaj, his explanation is, there's lots of explanation of Krishna's pastimes, and not a lot of information about the chronology and the duration and the timing of things. But, piecing something from here and something from there and something from there. So initially, it's like information gathering. I'm just commenting on this. Initially, it's information gathering. But that's not a good indication of absorption in Krishna consciousness. It can lead to absorption in Krishna consciousness. I can tell you, my thoughts in the morning hours before I get busy doing everything, it's very much absorbed in Krishna's pastimes. this pastime, that pastime, the other pastime. That's Krishna consciousness, just thinking of Krishna and Krishna's pastimes, his form at different stages. That's the essence of Krishna consciousness, manmana. But it should not just stay on the information. It's really being in a relationship with Krishna so that the attitude is pleasing towards Krishna, devoid of any other desire than to please the Lord. That's the measure of evaluating our standing and absorption in Krishna consciousness. Unobstructed by impersonal gyan, no, it's impersonal gyan, but jnana karma dhyanavartam. Not just to know, but to be in your relationship with Krishna in a mood of pleasing him. So this is the same understanding as the next chart. So the next chart has lots of hearts. And if you notice in the central heart over on the right side, there is a super soul. And this is going to say the same thing, just visually differently. At the heart of bhakti, there's one of the outer hearts, and that's anushilanam. That's the processes of bhakti. You can say it's what the body and the senses and the mind do. Like one of the processes of bhakti is smaranam. So it's what the senses and the mind do. And then the object is Krishna, the object of the seva. That's so closer to the heart of bhakti. But the very heart of the heart of bhakti is this intent to please Krishna. So that's a measure. All three actually is a measure of how we can evaluate these, the lens through which we can look at, introspect within ourselves and see how we're doing. So are we adhering to the 9 processes? Is Krishna the object of that service? And is the intention, sankalpa, because there's many, many verses in the Bhagavatam that specifically use the term sankalpa, the word Krishna is to be pleased. So those are ways, this is one standard by which we can evaluate our absorption and standing in Krishna consciousness. Now we're going to go to another acharya, and that's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. And in his Madhurya Kandambani, he has given some descriptions of stages of unsteady bhakti and then stages in steady bhakti. We'll take a look at both of them. So this is scriptural reference from our acharyas, how we can evaluate their progressive. In the unsteady bhakti stage, the preliminary unsteady stage is sudden enthusiasm, utsaha mahi. Utsaha, we know utsaha, is enthusiasm. And mayi means false or sporadic. I really like the example that Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj gave. I heard him speaking on this topic once. And the example he gave is really easy to understand. He said he was in London one time when George Harrison was visiting the Bhaktivedanta Manor because he had given the estate to ISKCON. They came to visit. So he was driven up in a limousine, got out of the limousine, and like it happens in London, it sometimes rains, and it had just rained. So he got out of the car, and one enthusiastic brahmachari paid full dandavats before George Harrison, a big mud puddle. He got up and his whole dhoti was drenching in mud. And George said, "You didn't have to do that." And that was his example of utsahamani. No, not a sudden burst of enthusiasm that's not at a mature stage of what enthusiasm really is. It's a type of unsteady bhakti. Jnana tarala is next, sometimes enthusiastic, sometimes lethargic, often none. Jnana tarala. Vyudha vikalpa, a stage when doubts assail one's resolve. In Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's writing, he has a whole page where it's in the internal dialogue of a young man contemplating, should I get married or should I remain brahmachari? And he goes this way, and he goes that way, and he goes this way, and he goes that way, and he goes this way. And the resolve doesn't go very far in either direction because there's doubt. Vyudha vikalpa. So one wants determination or resolution, resolute purpose, dhridavrata, but it's not manifest yet in this unsteady devotional stage. Vishaya sangara, a internal tug of war with material sense enjoyment. Vishaya, we know, sense enjoyment, sense involvement. Sangara. Sangara. Trying to let go of some attraction for some sense object, this Vishaya tendency, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. That's the unsteady. And niyama akshama is kind of the other direction. There's something that you feel you should do, but it's not getting done the way that it should do. And, we all have experience of both. At least this niyama akshama, where you consider carefully something that if I did this something on a regular basis, it'd be really good. You consider from different angles and you hear it and you read it in scripture and you make some resolve and it doesn't always happen. And you reconsider and you make some resolve and it doesn't happen. So you're not doing full justice to the bhakti process. Although one is practicing regularly, it's not yet steady, it's still unsteady. And Tarangarangani, this is an easy one. Supposing at some stage of bhakti, there's a little success. And with that little success comes some words of appreciation. Oh, you cooked a nice feast. Or, oh, you led a nice kirtan, you gave such a nice class. Or, oh, you organized the festival so nicely, or something or other. Or you get some position or some title or something, and you think, I'm the enjoyer of this little bit of success. Tarangarangani. Ranga means wave. Rangani is a diminutive wave, a small wave. And Tarangarangani is enjoying small waves. Being the enjoyer of some little success in spiritual life. It's a stage of unsteady bhakti. It is sequential. It's not like absolute buckets you move from this one to that one, but they're sequential. And he then, in the same book, Madhurya Kandamani, discusses it's the anarthas within the heart that have to be removed. And there's difficulties or obstacles in that process. And he gives 5. Laya is the weakness of being lethargic while hearing about the Lord, while then sequentially, while chanting his names and while remembering Lord Hari. Laya. Lethargy. Vikshepa, talking or thinking about mundane nonsense during devotional activities, such as hearing or chanting. So lethargy, thinking or talking about. This next one is distraction, when both Maya and Vikshepa are absent, but at times when still feels incapable of or disinterested in hearing and chanting. the distracted mind. Kashaya is defined as a tendency to display such fault as anger, greed, and arrogance during devotional activities. And rasavada means that the mind is so attached to sense pleasure, often meditating on it, that he isn't able to hear and chant with concentration. So this disinterest or apratipatti is, there's different ways. I'll spend some time with this one. It's sometimes spoken of or written about as indifference. So material indifference is good, but spiritual indifference is not good. And it's one of those things where the bhakti curve starts to going up, but after some time it starts to go down again. And that's the object, Krishna, kind of fades. The purpose behind the devotional activity fades, connecting with Krishna fades. The deity worship becomes mechanical, or chanting becomes mechanical, because it's not, initially it may be stronger, getting away from some unwanted something or other. But then the full shelter of Krishna isn't achieved, then complacency or indifference or then the mind becomes distracted by other things. So it's a kind of apathy. And apathy doesn't look good. Apathy looks like, rose when it's flourishing is very nice and fragrant and beautiful. But apathy is a rose that looks like this. And especially the hearing and chanting activities as the root of nourishing our bhakti is to be done with enthusiasm. And when enthusiasm is, Bhaktivinoda Thakur uses this terminology. When enthusiasm becomes, if enthusiasm does not become cold, that's his phrase, then the progress from unsteady to steady continues. But if enthusiasm fades, then it looks like this other one. So enthusiasm, utsaha, is very important. He writes in his Bhakti Loka, it's essential just to progress in anything, certainly spiritually, but even materially. Now here's a nice chart, and I think what I'm going to do is, it's a PDF. It's a high resolution PDF, so you can, when you have it, see that you get a copy. Rishabhan, I'm going to send you this. Send me a note to remind me. You have your phone in your hand, so send me a little note that says, send me this PDF on Madhurya Kandamini. And you can stretch it when you have it. You can move it. But it's the whole book in graphic design with the things that he says along the side. We're going to look at about a third of the way up. Here's a third of the way up, where there's Bhajana Kriya and Anarjana Vritti. So you see the Utsahamayi, Ganatarala, all those terminologies and little caption after each one. And same in the Anarjana Vritti stage. So Kleshagni and Shubhada, the first two leaves at the bottom, it's the book in a graphic form. And at the very bottom is the field of the heart. So that's the same as the essence of bhakti is from the heart. The heart of bhakti is that Krishna is to be pleased. And that is when it's cultivated properly, the bhakti creeper grows and grows and grows and becomes matured. So these are standards by which, or measures by which we can evaluate our absorption in and standing in the bhakti process or Krishna consciousness. And here's a completely different reference. It's a reference from Narada Muni. And those of you that have read Prabhupada's books, you'll know that the 7th canto is entirely spoken by Narada to Maharaj Yudhisthira. And the beginning of the 7th canto, this is chapter 11, but the beginning, chapter 1, is they're at their Rajasuya Yajna, and they've just seen Maharaj Yudhisthira has been installed as the Rajasuya. Bhishma Dev spoke about Krishna's glories. Shishupal objected. Krishna beheaded him with a Sudarshan chakra. And the ceremony went on. And at the end, chapter 1 begins with Maharaj Yudhisthira asking, how did Shishupal get liberation? Because he was such a bad person. And from his childhood, he was a bad person, inimical toward Krishna. Great sages and tapasvis and yogis, etc., for lifetimes, they tried for liberation, they didn't get liberation. And this bad fellow got liberation. How is that? And it opens the door for the whole 7th canto. So the response, it's a very interesting and important response. He was chanting Krishna's name. And it's similar to the chanting of Krishna's name that we hear in Canto 6. There's Abbas chanting. Ajamila chanted Abbas, Shishupal chanted Abbas. In Shishupal's case, it was scorn and derision. So somehow or another, the teaching says, this is where that Yena Tena Pakarina Mana Krishna Veshayat. Somehow absorb yourself in Krishna's name. Even if it's in the Abbas stage, because the Abbas stage is still very powerful. So in the course of the 7th canto, Narada comes around to describing the story of Prahlad. And it goes from chapter 6 to chapter 10. And at the end of chapter 10, chapter 11 begins, and Maharaj Yudhisthira says, paraphrasing, wow, Prahlad was such an exalted soul. And I'm now to become the king. It's my duty to lead citizens to come to that stage of bhakti. So please give me instructions how I or my citizens can come to that stage of bhakti. It's my duty as a king to help them. And in response, Narada says, well, one answer he gives is, by proper execution of varnashram duties, with the mind always absorbed in Krishna, like Daivi Varnashram. And then Padhi says, before you can do Varnashram properly, you have to be a human being. And to be a human being, there are some qualities. And so he lists qualities or general principles to be followed by all human beings. And it's a list of 30. And that list of 30, there's a longer version, make it shorter. The devotees in Hungary, led by Shivaram Maharaj, but not just him, the whole of the yatra, and not just the farm people, but the whole of the yatra became very absorbed a few years ago in trying to understand Prabhupada's instruction in establishing Varnashram. Now, maybe you've heard that discussion on that topic from time to time. And basically, my experience is it doesn't go anywhere. There's no concurrence. Like, what is it and how to do it? How to implement Varnashram. You know, this is the 125th anniversary of Prabhupada's appearance. And his last attempt to come to the U.S. had three main purposes. One of them was to establish Varnashram. He was going to go to Gitanagari and show the devotees how. You're aware of that history, I'm sure. And it was important to him. And he didn't get to manifest it. And it hasn't manifested. So the devotees in Hungary will, what is it and how to implement it. So they spent 6 months with a kind of think tank group of about 30 people, as I came to know what they did. And every week they'd come together for hours to discuss the topic. What is it and how to implement it? And they came up with, in conclusion, they came up with these verses as Narada's answer of how to get there. First, become a human being, or manifest qualities and characteristics of a human being. Principles to be followed by, because before you can follow Varnashram, you have to become qualified like this. So they decided that for 1 week, everyone that gave class about anything had to, what was committed to speak on one of those qualities. You know, the first one, the next week, the next one. So they would just focus on what it means to have become a human being possessed of these attributes. So that's a good way to evaluate. I've said this a few times in some other places, and it kind of clicked with some devotees. And then they started reading Shiva Ramaraj's book, Varnashram Compendium, which just discusses, well, it doesn't only discuss, but it discusses this. And what are these characteristics and qualities and general principles to be followed? Just sharing, but it's a topic that the devotees in China had interest in. How are you establishing Varnashram? Because they heard Prabhupada said it. So they asked me, how do we do this? I said, someone that's bilingual, take his book and explain the book. And because the book is like a primer in Varnashram, or how to become a human being, which is a step towards how to become a devotee like Prahlad. So if you want to evaluate how you're doing, what you're standing, and your absorption in Krishna consciousness, this is a very good step. The 9 processes of bhakti are included in that list of 30. It's not only qualities, but it's, it leads to devotional service. And how are we doing? How is anyone doing? Okay, so now, for those of you that like to read Prabhupada's books, here's another reference that comes from Uddhava Gita. It's not the only place, but it's one nice place. Here, I'll show you the verse in a moment. But it's towards the latter section of Uddhava Gita, where the qualifications for progressing in Bhagavad Dharma are identified. Having awakened faith in the narrations of my glories. Now that's a very important criterion. How does one awaken faith? Through sadhu sangha. That's made very clear in the prior text. Having awakened faith in the narrations of my glories, being disgusted with all material activities, that's the indifference to the material side, awakening of bhakti, indifference to the material side, knowing that all sense gratification leads to misery, but still being unable to renounce all sense enjoyment, my devotee remains happy and worships me with great faith and conviction. Even though he is sometimes engaged in sense enjoyment, my devotee knows that all sense gratification leads to a miserable result, and he sincerely repents such activities. So this is a stage in the progress of bhakti. There's the before faith in narrations about Krishna, awaken, and then there's when that faith in the narrations about Krishna awaken. And with that attraction for the topics of Krishna, the glitter gold of material accumulation and enjoyment of sense objects loses its luster. It starts to fade, and something takes greater prominence. But there is this intermediate stage where it doesn't all disappear. It's still there to some degree. So what to do? And resting strongly upon faith, that's known as faith in the narrations of Krishna's topics, and the conviction that if I continue with this process with enthusiasm, not the complacency kind, but the enthusiasm kind, then gradually, eventually, this in-between stage will be passed. So to fulfill this further progress, it takes self-honesty, where there's no duplicity, that is, we're not deceiving ourselves, nor are we deceiving others. There's a continuous refinement of getting clarity in what the goal is. No complacency, that's this vikshepa and maya. No complacency. Continuously striving, and little by little by little. So this is something that we can, it's good if you have this regular step back. But sometimes devotees get like intimidated by getting into a patchwork of uncertainty. But it's actually wholesome. It's good to, Krishna can arrange it. It's something you can schedule yourself for periodically. Step back, take a look, like this couple was expressing, this Hiraj Maharaj disciple couple. Step back, how are we doing? You know, we're not doing as well as we feel we could, we should be, want to be. So how is our standing? And taking an honest look, then taking a look at as you progress in Krishna, and this is my experience, as you progress in Krishna consciousness, the language of what the goal is may not change, but your sense of what it is will change. Just like your sense of what the world is around you. It's like, becoming absorbed in the Bhagavatam. The world around you doesn't change, but your experience of the world around you changes. And you have a different sense of what the world around you is, as well as a different sense of what the goal is. And as you progress, there's refinement in both that comes, more in focus or more closely matching what the Bhagavatam says. In other words, we're not really fully understanding what the Bhagavatam says, or what Bhagavad Gita says. The first time you read it, second time you read it, third time you read it, it takes some absorption. So there needs to be some readiness to adjust or refine or recalibrate or reorient ourselves towards how we're carrying out our activities. And these standards are given to us. And there's one more. Krishna himself speaks in Bhagavad Gita about the stage where the material situation doesn't look good. One of the topics that I'm going to be speaking about more here is maintaining gratitude even during difficult times. So these days, it seems, it's abundant, difficult times of one kind or another. COVID is certainly something that has caused an upside-down situation for many people in different ways, but other circumstances. So how is that steadiness, or you can take a look at your own situation. How well are you doing in maintaining steadiness in the midst of difficult times? And the image is specifically, a barren road and sidewalk. And somehow in the middle there's this nice flower growing. Maybe someone just stuck it in a crack, or maybe it grew, or however it got there. How are we to maintain steadiness when things are looking bleak? Is it possible? Is it within the reach or grasp of any one of us or each of us? And the answer is yes. And what does it look like? Well, I don't know how many of you listened several times to that video that Yadabar and Vishaka put together on Prabhupada, that recent full-length movie, Hare Krishna, the person who started the movement and so forth. But one of the sections that I like a lot, remember it a lot, is it looks like a television studio. There's a man sitting behind a desk, and Prabhupada's over here. And the man says something like, Swamiji, you came to the West to deliver a message. Would you like to share with us what that message is that you came to deliver? Prabhupada's very short answer, to know yourself. The man was like, to know yourself. Prabhupada just said it again, to know yourself. And, that means a lot, because know yourself, unpack it. To know yourself, there's nothing material about the knowing yourself. It's knowing minimally is Brahmabhuta. And when one knows oneself, prasanatma, Brahmabhuta prasanatma, it's a symptom of knowing yourself. Because even when there's difficult times, you still know yourself. And the difficult times is not who yourself is. It's in the limited and temporary. So that's knowing yourself. Brahmabhuta prasanatma, sochati vipaksati. No hankering, no menting. Finished. And seeing all living entities equal. Samaksharbesha bhuteshu. Those are symptoms. So how much are those symptoms present in each of us? So we can check the box in the Bhakti Shastri exam and say, this is who I am. But then on the internal side, how well have we achieved this prasanatma, the sochiti vipaksati position? And this is the last slide. We have our method. And that's, very simply for everyone. The same method, Hare Krishna mantra. Now the image on the left side, of course, is the mantra below. But I like images. So it's walking in some wilderness somewhere. So where all of us, how much uncertainty is there in our everyday life? I mean, the pandemic happened and then it seemed to subside, and now there's this other thing. And we don't know. Who knows? Except that we don't know. And it's more intense sometimes, it's less intense at other times. But the reality is we don't know. On the material side, it's quite uncertain. So what can you be certain about? You can be certain about Krishna is very kind. That's an expectation that's very realistic. Somebody just today, I received a note from somebody from Singapore, and they were reading, they clicked on a passage from one song by Narottam Das Thakur, and they had this idea that if you, what's the word? I think it's the same word, expectation. Yeah. If you have expectations, if you have material expectations, it's a recipe for disappointment, guaranteed. But spiritual expectations are not to be made zero. That was my reply to him. He didn't understand. Isn't that a problem? Having an expectation that Krishna is going to rescue you. or Krishna is going to show his kindness. That's the one thing that we have. It's a realistic expectation. Krishna is going to be kind, even though it may be a difficult patch that you pass through. That's quite okay. There's ways to describe all that, but nasojati nakangsati and prasanatma, even when there's uncertainty. And the certainty that Krishna's shelter is there in his holy name. So this is not an exhaustive look at the topic, but they're very core teachings by the mercy of our founder Acharya we have available to us to evaluate how we're doing. It's not just subjective, it's something that's based on Shastra and tells us how to evaluate what is our standing and our present situation in Krishna consciousness, our absorption and our standing in Krishna consciousness. So I made this short on purpose, and I was really happy when I saw that you picked this for this evening, because I knew there'd be something between here and the airport that would cause difficulty. There was a lot of traffic. And the flight came in late, and I was there on the curbside before he was, because traffic coming from out here into the airport. So let's see, I'm hoping we'll have some nice discussion, because this is a very relevant topic. Do we have a portable microphone?
No, Maharaj.
No? Well, we'll see. Huh? Okay, but our online people aren't going to be able to hear. Huh? You can hand it to me, but I've got this, COVID thing that because who knows where the flowers came from and who handled them and all that. So I'm saying thank you, but no thank you to Brahmins for the last 6 months. But thank you. Go ahead.
So, Maharaj, when we are strong in our sadhana, we are practicing very sincerely, then we run into a situation like we just tried, where we get into a mode of some sense gratification, have repentance, overcome it. So, I'm trying to understand, Maharaj, what is the underlying reason? Is it Krishna putting us through a test?
Is it what?
Is it Krishna putting us through a test, or
No.
is there some feeling in our sadhana?
Yeah. I mean, let me repeat the question for our online people. We're going along in our devotional life, and like this inability to let go of some object of sense gratification. So what's the cause? Is it that Krishna is putting us to some test? Or what was the other option?
Is there something lacking in our sadhana?
Is it something lacking in our sadhana? Well, there's many ways to answer that, but two principal ways to answer that resonate very well with me is the very root cause of our material existence. The very root cause of our material existence has got a hold on us. The very root cause is wanting raga dvesha samutina davan vamohina bhakta, wanting to be an enjoyer separate from Krishna. It's primordial. And so bhakti lifts us up above that, but that tendency has got a hold on us. And now that tendency that has a hold on us works through the agency of Maya. The deluding potency of the Lord acts upon one who has such a desire. So we become again deluded and again deluded and again deluded. The unsteadiness is a delusion because of that primordial wanting to be an enjoyer independent of Krishna. Another way of saying this is still the first one. Another way of saying the same thing. It's slightly different. But this pratipatti has different Sanskrit terms that go with it. It's very similar. And it comes to indifference. So before there's aversion to Krishna, there's an attraction for other than Krishna, or seeing things apart from Krishna. There's an indifference in our attitude towards Krishna. That is to say, another way of saying, the real spirit of bhakti has not been taken full shelter yet. There's still, what's in it for me consciousness, and thus an indifference toward Krishna because Krishna is the object of bhakti. Indifference. It's kind of like a neutral state, not averse to Krishna, but not attracted to Krishna either. Not averse to sense gratification, but that pressing of Maya is right next door. The way that Prabhupada said it, I remember this very clearly in New York. Prabhupada said, when you slacken in your submission, it's not like, you have to say anything to Maya. Okay, Maya, you can come. I need a little break from devotional service. When in that attitude of taking a break or taking a vacation or slackening in submission, Prabhupada made a sound with his hand. Like immediately Maya is there. No delay. Because Maya is Krishna's energy, and if the living entity desires other than Krishna, then Maya is immediately there. So that when there's submission to Krishna slackens, immediately Maya is there. And it's primordial. You cannot trace the point in time where that began. So that's the default. So we hear, we chant, we association, and we rise above that. And if submission slackens, then it's the default position again. And that's what unsteady bhakti is. So why it happens is that primordial desire of, say, either one of two ways, that I want to enjoy, and Krishna's out of the picture. And that's kind of stronger. Another is a little softer, but there's indifference. Even when we're doing bhakti, a kind of indifference toward the object. It's Krishna who's to be pleased. That is, in other words, we're still at the center. It's our happiness, our bliss, and we're at the center. It's not yet that Krishna's the object meant to be pleased by us. Now, the super elevated position of the resident of Vrindavan, it's the other way. They see and experience all kinds of varieties of things, but Krishna is always at the center. Deep. The phrase that's used is possessiveness. It's mamata. Krishna's mine. He's everything. He is my everything. They don't have anything else. And if Krishna's not there, then it's like everything's finished. but he's always there because that's their heart. So that's the matured stage, the Vrindavan stage, the Brijvasi stage. And our stage is somewhere way over here. You know, it's weak. Submission unto Krishna is unsteady. Sometimes you're a little stronger, sometimes weaker. So it's the internal part of unsteady in our submission, and another way is second way of saying is conditioning. We're creatures of habit. You do something, you do something, you do something, you do something. It becomes second nature. So you don't even have to think about when it's second nature. It's a second.
That sense gratification is so subtle that you don't even realize it. Then how do you even arrest it? How do you even...
Well, as if you don't realize it, then you'll continue in the journey of birth and death. But as one continues with enthusiasm, and not just passion, but enthusiasm to connect with Krishna, the purpose of life is to connect with Krishna again. So as that effort continues and continues, just like that verse that we showed from Bhagavad Gita, then gradually, as that tendency rises inside, I mean, it's discussed in chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita. Just yesterday, I was asked to do an overview of chapter 6 Bhagavad Gita. I can only do the first 23 verses because it's so much. But the first, anyway, the less mature stage is do your Ashtanga Yoga with offering the fruits of your work or your activity to Krishna. Detached work, Karma Yoga plus Nishkam Karma Yoga plus some of the Ashtanga Yoga stages. And that's for the earlier stage of Ashtanga Yoga. Then the more mature stages, the desire is checked by knowledge. It's not stopped, but it's checked, it's held by knowledge. And then as the yoga system matures, then you no longer require Nishkam Karma Yoga. You just do meditation. That's the Ashtanga Yoga system. For the Bhakti system, we continue with the hearing and chanting activities because it cleanses the mind. Read the purport to Bhagavad Gita chapter 6, 20 to 23. It's all explained right there. When the subtle cleansing has become matured, so we continue until that subtle cleansing becomes matured, then one's spiritual identity becomes revealed. No, we're not there yet, but spiritual svarupena vyavastiti, the activity of a living entity in the liberated stage, where material existence is finished, the nirvana stage is reached, and the spiritual activity stage is awakened. So, with faith in the process, just like that verse from Bhagavad Gita, faith in the process of hearing topics about Krishna, it's powerful. It's more powerful than the Ashtanga Yoga and the other things. But so having that faith, then we continue in sadhu sangha to do that together. And gradually the conditioned tendency becomes cleansed. Chaitadarpan margina. Gradually. there has to be the bhakti principle has to be awakened, that I want to do this for the pleasure of Krishna. Not just, this material condition is disgusting. It's not sufficient. That was what that verse said. I understand it's disgusting, but he still do anyways. So the bhakti principle has to be nourished, and then the whole apparatus can dissolve. That is to say, the deluding potency of Maya subsides when Krishna sees he's sincere or she's sincere. They really want me. Another way of saying the same thing. This is Prabhupada in New York. We're giving a morning Bhagavatam class. Krishna will sometimes test me. This is your question. Krishna will test us. So that's for the devotee. And Krishna, so you say to Krishna, I want you. I want my relationship with you restored. And Krishna will consider, do you really want me? What about a little difficulty? Do you still want me even when there's a difficulty? And the devotee says, that's okay. I only want you. What about a little sense gratification? I don't want sense gratification. Prabhupada lifted his arm. No sense gratification. I only want you. Then I'll give myself to that person. So there's some examining, but it's, it's another picture of the same examining is that the deluding potency will take every opportunity to cover us, because her business is to keep unqualified people away from Krishna. And she's really good at it. So the essence is that the desire to please Krishna has to be strengthened, or that submission to Krishna's happiness is everything. That's the Bhagavatam's teaching, that's the Bhakti teaching, and especially Lord Chaitanya's teaching, the Braja Prema idea or model. Everything for Krishna. Someone else? You have something?
Yeah, Mataji, yes, Mataji, please go ahead.
But spiritual, we should have spiritual expectation. Do we can have spiritual expectation?
We can have spiritual what? Expectations? Oh, yeah. What is spiritual expectation? I gave one. Here, I'll say it again. Krishna is kind. Now, what is that going to look like? I may have idea what it should look like. And guess what? Krishna may, and often does, have a different idea of what it's going to look like. But Krishna is kind. So the kindness may come in the form of tribulation. It is Krishna's kindness. The kindness may come, however, Krishna, because he knows what our affinity for enjoyment is, and he'll help us to become free from that affinity for enjoyment. That's that's an expectation that's spiritual. Well, let's just say, here's another one. It has something to do with faith, that by the process of hearing topics about Krishna, that's that getting on that train, or that following that path, will lead me to everything desirable. And I'm not even so elevated that I know what is desirable and and what's undesirable. And, you know, I have some ideas, but I'm not, you know, I'm not there yet. But I do have faith in, this is an expectation that's spiritual, that continuing carefully in good association with hearing topics about Krishna. That's a realistic expectation or spiritual expectation. I'll give another example. You know the story in Chaitanya Charitamrita of Kalidas that had faith in taking prasad of the Vaishnavas? Are you familiar with that story? You've heard it once. I'll narrate it quickly. I'll tell the story again. It's a long story, but a really short version because of the time and circumstance. He had faith in honoring the prasad remnants of Vaishnavas. And the way that Krishnadas Kaviraj narrates the story, this is the grain of rice and the pot of rice. And he tells the story of going to one Brahmin's, he was a Brahmin, and he went to one Vaishnava's home, Vaishnava Grihastha's home, and he explicitly wanted the remnants of his prasad. And the devotee said, please don't ask like this, you're an elevated Brahmana, and I'm this fallen householder, and, please don't make that request. I don't want to be disrespectful to Brahmana, but how can I realize what you're asking? And then Kalidas gave verse after verse after verse after verse after verse, something very similar to what Advaitacharya did in relation to Haridas Thakur, one who chants the holy name. He's the most exalted. And, the Vaishnava householder was very pleased, but he was still reluctant to give remnants of his prasad. So Kalidas left the mango, the wife offered the mango to Krishna, and he took prasad, and his wife took the remnants of her husband, and they discarded the pit and the skin. Kalidas was hiding behind a tree, and when they weren't looking, he went and got from the refuse pile the pit and sucked on the pit of the mango and licked the outside of the mango, the skin of the mango, and was satisfied. And in this way, he went all over Bengal. How many Vaishnavas were there in Bengal at that time? Too many. And so, he did that faithfully because he had faith or had an expectation, a spiritual expectation that my life will become successful. This by taking the remnants of the prasad of the Vaishnavas. So that same Kalidas went one time when they were in Puri. Lord Chaitanya was really strict, really super strict. No one could take the water that washed his feet. Kalidas cupped his hands as Lord Chaitanya was entering into one of the gates to the Jagannath temple. His servant was washing his feet. He cupped his hand and took 3 mouthfuls. He would stretch his hands out for some more. Lord Chaitanya allowed him. He would never allow anybody. But because he knew it was just stop this cup. You're creative. But he got Lord Chaitanya's mercy because of that faith. And there's some other things happened. So that's a spiritual and a realistic expectation. Those examples. So we need to realign what we think is valuable and spiritual with the teachings of Scripture, and these, not do what Kalidas did because we don't have that kind of faith, but in principle, move in that direction. Now, you want to add something? I've got the microphone over by your this little device so you can say again. Do you want to say something further?
Thank you, Maharaj. And I'm so sorry I told you Prabhuji earlier because time. Sorry. And one more question, Maharaj. So in Varnashram, in Kali Yuga, now we are in Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga, like we are having all the bad qualities, and we are totally mixed up. Like we are Shudra, we are also having some Brahmanical qualities. So everything. So how do we maintain? How do we understand what we are, and how do we follow that?
Well, you've already given the answer. We're mishmash. We're Kali Yugaites. But by the process of Mahajano Yena Katasa Panta, by following, by taking the teachings of great souls, Narada Muni is one of those Mahajans, we can understand what the good qualities really are, and by following them, taking the instructions to do so, we can cultivate. Now, we can't, on our own we can't, but through the bhakti process we can. So your question was, what's our standing in the Varnashram system? Our standing in the Varnashram system is we're not qualified yet. Because we're not having these essential characteristics just to be a human being. Now, that's kind of harsh. Like, so what are we supposed to do? Now, Prabhupada didn't say that, hold off on your bhakti, Mataji, because you're not a human being yet. You have to become a human being before you can do bhakti. That's not what Prabhupada taught. Bhakti will help us to become qualified human beings. But we should also be aware, this is so, it's a delicate topic, and it's not an easily, like, here's a nice pocket, put everything in that pocket and it fits kind of an explanation. Because bhakti is in the foreground of elevation. At the same time, we have to become civilized, and as we become civilized, or human beings, Aryans of good quality, good character, good conduct, then we'll have greater clarity what our nature is and where we fit into the Varnashram system. If you want to understand that more deeply, Varnashram Compendium. It's a thick book, but some devotees I know are very interested in the topic because they want to become human beings. They want to become like Prabhupada. And that's Narada's teaching of how to get there. Here's one of those items that's in that list is compassion. Now, there are some devotees I know that are really interested, there's somebody really interested in devotee care, and there's some really interested in compassionate speech. So take any one of them. Take any one of those qualities and become really focused on being a good example, becoming a good example of what Narada Muni is teaching, what Krishna is teaching, in terms of speaking the truth. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 17, text 15. Speaking the truth palatably, or where you're not trampling on somebody else's sensibilities. You're speaking the truth, uncompromisingly speaking the truth palatably. That's a challenge, isn't it? But cultured persons know how to do that, or refined, elevated in consciousness persons know how to do that. It's not easy. We find in devotee circles sometimes, devotees, they're very absorbed in speaking the truth, and they can speak very harshly what they consider to be the truth. They're not considering what the impact is on others. That's not one of those qualities that's described by Narada Muni or by Krishna. So how to cultivate that quality? So I'm responding by saying, take one of those qualities and become proficient at it. It'll help you by becoming human in this quality, this aspect of life. It'll help in other aspects of life. Where Krishna Maharaj has a whole extensive seminar on empathic communication that he spent some years studying on nonviolent communication and just Christianized it all. I'm just taking this as an example of how we can become what Narada Muni was saying here. Okay, someone else. You have something else on mind?
No.
No. Anyone else in the room? Yes.
Thank you for so much guidance how to improve the Krishna consciousness.
Hmm.
And my question is, like you were mentioning, always remembering the pastimes of Krishna, glories and everything. So is it okay to visualize those pastimes during chanting? Because always chanting is, just chant and listen. Nothing else should go into the mind. So does that include or exclude remembering the pastimes of Krishna?
Anything that results in focus on the sound is good. Remembrance of Krishna's pastimes that flows from the sound is ecstatic. It's excellent. Multi-processing, the mind is thinking of the pastimes, the mind is not hearing the sound. Now, I just shared with you, because of absorption in contemplating Krishna's pastimes, results in, when I'm chanting these days, thoughts of the pastimes come, and it's sublime. But I'm very careful to make sure my attention doesn't drift from the sound into the pastime. Because the essence of our process is the sound of Krishna's name. Or say the same thing in a different way. Same thing. According to Haridas Thakur, which is Bhaktivinoda Thakur's writing. Nama, Rupa, Guna, Lila in sequence. By absorption in the nama, then the form becomes revealed. As the form becomes revealed, the qualities of Krishna become revealed, and the pastimes of Krishna become revealed. But it starts with the name. It doesn't like you leave the name and start thinking of the pastimes, or there's a parallel thought processor going on. You follow?
Even when chanting, the mind does not stay, it keeps wandering.
That's the material tendency.
So,
Now, supposing you do what, supposing you or I, one of us, were chanting, and because the mind is distracted, we'll spend time over there, or spend time over there, or we'll spend time over there, but not on the name, because the tendency is to get distracted. That's also distracted chanting. Because the chanting is hearing the sound. And if it's distracted. It's better than the other kinds of distractions, that's for sure. But it's just not focusing. My initial response still stands. Anything that helps you stay absorbed in that sound That's good. And it's a substitute for the name because I don't like that distraction. I like this distraction. It's not ideal. Can you do it? Sure. Not ideal. Ideal is anything that assists you in bringing your attention, the ear to the sound. Here's Bhaktisiddhanta's teaching. Rishabhanu is going to send me a little note so he can send to him and he'll send to you. The ear conquers the mind. When the mind is the sixth sense, there's 5 others, knowledge acquiring senses. So the distracted mind is absorbed in other things besides hearing, and other things even when we're doing other things. The mind gets distracted. But the way to conquer the mind is, Bhaktisiddhanta's teaching is the ear. Because when the ear is hearing spiritual sound vibration, the mind becomes conquered. And he uses this phrase, the mind no longer quibbles, just accepts. The ear is more powerful, and the mind becomes captured by the ear. So we want to curb the distracted mind. Ear can do it. The mind will become conquered. But if you're not finding the ear is sufficiently strong to conquer the mind, it's not going to work just to do the other, because it's Hari Nama, Hari Nama, Hari Nama. Okay, it's not harmful, but it's another less than ideal situation. So my recommendation to you is, if thoughts of Krishna's activities, pastimes, etc. come, make sure, check yourself internally, and is your attention staying with the name? If so, fine.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. No other questions.
No other questions? We're going to end. I should say 3.
Recording stopped.
Should have